In the previous lecture, we learned about JSX and which allows us to write HTML like syntax inside JavaScript. Today, we will learn about one of the most important concept in React called components, the types of components, the functional components and the class components, the life cycle of component, and how do you style in React, what are the types of styling, and the best practices. Let us understand what a component is. Imagine you are visiting an online shopping website like Amazon or Flipkart. You can observe different sections on the web page. For example, uh, there is a header at the top, a navigation menu, a search bar, the product cards, and the footer. Instead of writing the entire web page in one file, React allows us to create each section separately as individual components. Each component performs a specific task and can be reused in multiple places. This modular approach makes applications easier to develop, maintain, and update. One of the most powerful and important features of React is component reusability. In fact, reusability is one of the main reasons why React has become so popular among web developers. Imagine a company has a website with 20 different web pages. These pages may include the home page, about us, services, products, careers, contact us, blog, and many others. If you observe these web pages carefully, you will notice that almost every page contains the same navigation bar at the top. The navigation bar usually includes options such as home, about, services, contact, and login. Now imagine building this website using traditional HTML. The developers would have to copy and paste the navigation bar code into all 20 web pages. Although this works initially, it creates a major problem when changes are required. Suppose a company decides to add a new menu item called support or change the company logo. If the navigation bar has been copied into 20 different files, the developer must open each web page individually, make the required changes, save the file, and verify that everything works correctly. This process is not only time consuming but also increases the chances of mistakes. React solves this problem through component reusability. So, whenever web page needs a navigation bar, the developer simply imports this navigation component and uses it. Reusability not only saves development time but also reduces duplicate code. Instead of writing the same code repeatedly, developers write it once and reuse it wherever required. Another major benefit is easy maintenance. Large applications may contain hundreds of components. If every element, such as buttons, headers, footers, navigation bars, or login forms, is written separately on every web page, maintaining the application becomes extremely difficult. Reusability also improves consistency across the applications. Another advantage is team collaboration. In this large software companies, different developers work on different parts of the same application. One developer may build the navigation component, another developer may create the footer component, while another develops the login component. Once these components are created, every team member can reuse them instead of creating similar components from scratch. This improves productivity and ensures that everything follows the same design standards. So, to summarize, component reusability is one of React's greatest strength. So React supports two different types of components. The first is the functional component. The second is the class component. Earlier versions of React mainly used class components. However, modern React applications are developed using functional components because they are simpler and they support hooks. In the modern React applications, a functional component is simply a JavaScript function that returns JSX. Whenever React executes this function, it generates the corresponding user interface and displays it in the browser. If you already know JavaScript functions, learning functional components becomes very easy because their syntax is almost identical. The only difference is that instead of returning a numerical value or a string, a React functional component returns JSX, which represents the user interface. For example, imagine that we create a function called welcome. Inside this function, we return a heading displaying the message welcome to React. When React calls this function, it converts the returned JSX into HTML element and displays the heading on the web page. One of the biggest advantage of the functional component is its simplicity. They require very little code compared to old React components. The developer can create a complete user interface by writing just a few lines of code. Another advantage is that functional components are easy to read and understand. Since they are plain JavaScript functions, even beginners can quickly learn how they work. This improves collaboration among developers because the code is clean and organized. Initially, functional components were mainly used for displaying user interface elements because they could not manage state or lifecycle events. However, with the introduction of React hooks, functional components became much more powerful. Today, they can manage state, perform side effects, fetch data from server, and so on. Therefore, when you start developing a React application, using functional component is considered the recommended and also the best practice. Before functional components became popular, React developers mainly used class components to build applications. A class component is based on JavaScript classes. To create one, the class must extend the React.component class, which provides all the necessary React functions. Whenever React needs to display or update the component, it automatically calls the render method. Whatever JSX is returned by this method becomes a visible user interface. Although class components are powerful, they require more code. Developers need to write constructors using this keyword repeatedly, bind methods, and understand lifecycle methods. As application become larger, the additional syntax may make the code longer and harder to maintain. With the introduction of React hooks in React 16.8, functional components gained all the important capabilities that class components previously provided. As a result, developers no longer needed to write lengthy class based code for most applications. Therefore, while it is important to understand class components for interviews and legacy projects, functional components are now considered the modern standard in React development. Every React component goes through a sequence of stages during its lifetime. This sequence is known as the component life cycle. Understanding the life cycle is important because it helps developers know exactly when a component is created, updated, and removed from the web page. The first stage is called mounting. Mounting occurs when a component is created for the first time and inserted into the web page. During this stage, React builds the component, processes its JSX, and displays it to the user. The second stage is called updating. After the component has been displayed, its data may change due to user interaction, API response, or state updates. Whenever this happens, React automatically updates the component by re-rendering it. For example, imagine a shopping cart displaying the number of selected products. For every time the user adds or removes an item, the displayed count changes. The React updates only the affected component instead of refreshing the entire web page. The final stage is unmounting. Unmounting occurs when the component is removed from the web page because it is no longer needed. For example, if a user closes a pop-up window or navigate to another page, React removes the corresponding component from memory. Understanding these three lifecycle stages, mounting, updating, and unmounting, help developers build efficient applications and manage system resources properly. A web page will not become complete without styling. Styling determines the appearance of the application, including colors, fonts, spacing, layouts, animations, and responsiveness. React supports several methods for applying styles, giving developers the flexibility to choose the approach that best suits their project. The first method is inline styling, where CSS properties are written directly inside the JSX code. The second method is external CSS. Here, styles are stored in separate CSS files and imported into the components. The third method is CSS modules, which provide locally scoped CSS to prevent style conflicts between components. Each method has its own advantages. Some applications often use inline styles or external CSS because they are simple and easy to manage. Large enterprise applications usually prefer CSS modules or styled components because they improve organization and prevent naming conflict. Selecting the appropriate styling methods depend on the size, complexity, and requirement of the project. Inline styling applies CSS directly within JSX using a JavaScript object. Notice that the style attribute contains double curly braces. The outer braces indicate a JavaScript expression, while the inner braces represent a JavaScript object containing CSS properties. Inline styles are useful when style needs to change dynamically. External CSS is one of the simplest and most familiar styling methods. The styles are written in separate CSS file and then imported into the React component. This approach keeps styling separate from the application logic, improving readability and maintainability.